This is Alice, the Decepticon pretender from Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. Unlike the towering robots fans were used to by this point, Alice was different. She wasn't a car, a jet, or a tank. Instead, she transformed into a college student. And when she finally revealed her true nature, it wasn't in an explosive battle. It was in a disturbing split-second transformation that horrified audiences. But behind that quick moment was something a few people realized. Just one close-up shot of her face peeling away took 3 months to animate. And the full transformation sequence, it was in development for over half a year. While it wasn't as flashy or loud as some of the other transformations in the film, it was easily one of the most difficult to pull off. A visual haunting moment that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with visual effects at the time. This is the story of Michael Bay's Alice.
Is your radio broken?
No, my concentration is.
So how did the idea to include a pretender in the film even come about? Well, during the pre-production for Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, director Michael Bay set out to expand the scope of the franchise in bold new directions. He wasn't just interested in making things bigger, he wanted to explore the full range of what a Transformer could be, from towering giants that loomed like skyscrapers to microscopic machines operating at the molecular level. Bay's goal was to push the limits of imagination, because he wanted the world of the Transformers to feel boundless, filled with characters of every shape, size, and function. Hasbro played a key role in bringing that vision to life. Long before the sequel was officially greenlit, they had already begun working with Massive Black, a concept art studio based in San Francisco that previously collaborated with them on the first Transformers film. For this second round, Hasbro specifically tasked Massive Black with developing a library of fresh character ideas that could be used if a sequel moved forward. This meant Bay and the team already had a pool of experimental designs and concepts to pull from once production began. One of the more unexpected ideas Hasbro pitched to Massive Black was a character they nicknamed Chopper Medusa. From the start, Hasbro had a clear creative intent. They wanted to channel the mythological aura of Medusa, a seductive but deadly figure, and reimagine it through the lens of alien machinery. Their vision was of a grotesque woman-monster transformer that could turn into a low-riding chopper-style motorcycle, with striking anatomical cues, handlebars as horns, gas tanks for a chest, and exhaust tubes flowing like serpentine hair. In some early notes, they even floated the idea that she could be made up of multiple motorcycles, allowing for extra wheels or wheel guards, essentially flirting with the idea of a scaled-down combiner. Hasbro's brief was deliberately loose, just detailed enough to spark ideas, while leaving the door open for interpretation and revision. That freedom allowed Massive Black to explore bold, unconventional directions in visualizing the character. And on October 18, 2007, Massive Black delivered 3 major interpretations of the character, each one pushing the brief in a slightly different direction. The first version leaned closer to a stylized humanoid silhouette with only subtle mechanical cues. It was sleeker and more restrained, a design that still invoked danger but through posture and sharp detailing. The second design, on the other hand, was far more aggressive, a fully mechanical monster more in line with the Bayverse art style. It had headlights on the chest, tires that made up the shoulders and feet, and wires forming a tangled nest of hair. This version really leaned into the Medusa angle over the first concept. However, the last iteration Massive Black cooked up appeared to merge the best of both worlds. It retained the chaotic serpentine hair of the second design and the feminine humanoid form of the first, but balanced with more refined proportions and readable surface detail. The design featured clawed hands, sharper limbs, and a more expressive face. Now, while the Chopper Medusa concept was wildly imaginative and unlike anything previously seen in the franchise, at some point during production, the team decided to abandon the motorcycle idea entirely. It's unclear exactly why the shift occurred, but by early 2008, the direction for the character had dramatically changed. The next evolution of the character came under the guidance of the film's art director, Ben Proctor, who steered the design towards something more human. Literally. Rather than transforming into a chopper, this new iteration of the character would transform into a human, thus making her a pretender, which is a Cybertronian capable of blending in seamlessly with humans, using a fully artificial flesh disguise to infiltrate and deceive. At this stage, the working name for the character was simply Hot Chick, a blunt, tongue-in-cheek label that captured the tone of the early concepting phase. To explore how a believable human disguise could fracture and reveal the mechanical terror underneath, Proctor used a headshot of actress Rachel Nichols, who at the time was actively filming for G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, where she would later play Scarlet. Her image served as a visual base as the team experimented with ways to portray a convincing transformation. Much of the focus during this period centered on how the transition between synthetic flesh and alien machinery would look, from subtle facial cracks to large-scale surface breakups. All of this work led to a key piece of concept art dated March 19, 2008. This version solidified the direction for the surface breakup effect, and was marked with a new, finalized label, Pretender Alice. At last, the character had a name, and a defined identity within the film's universe. Now, around 2 months later, on May 22, 2008, Ben Proctor continued expanding Alice's design with ideas for her built-in weaponry. One of the most memorable additions was her tongue. And this wasn't just any tongue. It was a biomechanical horror, armored in overlapping metallic plates with a disturbingly lifelike fleshy tip. The design was both alien and intimate, a perfect extension of Alice's unsettling duality as a seductress and predator. This tongue would go on to become one of the character's most iconic features, visually underscoring the horror of a Decepticon hiding beneath a human shell. Now, just 1 week later on May 29, 2008, the final piece of major concept art was completed by art director Ben Proctor and concept artist Ryan Maynarding, revealing Alice's full robot mode. This design locked in several new elements, including a dramatic arm transformation where her hands transformed into sleek energy weapons. Her mechanical hair is labeled as hypodermic barbs, suggesting a more lethal biological function. Now, what's most interesting to me is that in the notes at the bottom of the concept art, it tells us that they made the creative decision to integrate aspects of Frenzy's design into her. That influence is especially noticeable in her clawed, spindly legs, which are nearly identical to Frenzy's from the knees down. The rest of her silhouette is jagged and furl, with clawed fingertips, elongated limbs, and vertebrae-like spinal detailing, giving her the aura of something engineered for ambush and infiltration. Now, with Alice fully visualized in concept art, the next step was finding someone who could embody her deceptive beauty and mysterious presence, and that responsibility ultimately went to Australian actress Isabelle Lucas. Though how she got the role is a story in itself. At the time, Lucas was relatively new to Hollywood. She had just wrapped up a small role in The Pacific, the World War II miniseries produced by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. According to Lucas, it was Spielberg himself who saw her performance and reached out to her agent, encouraging her to read for the part of Alice. That unexpected recommendation quickly led to an audition with Michael Bay. But the audition itself was anything but traditional. Lucas showed up wearing a black dress, only for Bay to send her out, asking her to return in something more colorful. As she later recalled, Bay wanted her to match the vibrant summery tone of the movie, so she did just that, coming back an hour later in a purple dress. The rest of the audition played out in true Bay fashion. After reading some lines in his office, he had her finish up the scene in his car, since that's where it was set in the script. Lucas called it one of the most unusual auditions she's ever experienced, but also one of the most memorable. However, landing the role was just the beginning. Bringing Alice to life on set came with its own unique challenges, particularly during the scene where her human disguise begins to unravel. Michael Bay later described it as one of the more demanding sequences for Lucas, who had to channel something raw and animalistic. To help her find the right energy, Bay got down on all fours, growling like a tiger to demonstrate the level of primal aggression he was looking for. Since the script didn't fully describe how the transformation should feel, much of the performance had to be discovered in the moment. Bay recalled doing numerous takes with Lucas, pushing her to shed any hesitation or self-consciousness in front of the crew. It was about committing fully to the bizarre nature of the role, snarling, lunging, and becoming something monstrous beneath the surface. And while Lucas embraced the bizarre demands of the role, even the more mundane aspects came with their own unique challenges. One of them was running in stilettos. Since Alice was meant to maintain the illusion of a confident college student, even in scenes that involved fast movement, Bay insisted on keeping the heels. Lucas, who wasn't used to wearing them, recalled Bay giving her a crash course on how to sprint in stilettos. She trained for the scene by running on her tiptoes, only for Bay to ultimately change direction and decide Alice should walk for dramatic effect. Still, the experience became one of many examples of how physical and unpredictable filming the role could be. In fact, Lucas even filmed a rooftop stunt while strapped in a harness. However, none of that footage made it into the final cut of the film. And speaking of scenes that were left on the cutting room floor, one of the most known omissions was Alice's original introduction, something we actually have some footage for. You see, initially the writers Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman had envisioned a much more nuanced entry for the character. In their original version, Alice would have been introduced not as a seductive infiltrator, but as a seemingly sweet and approachable classmate, someone that Sam could talk to without suspecting any ulterior motives. Orci and Kurtzman envisioned her presence as subtle and disarming, slowly building tension over time so that her eventual reveal as a Decepticon would catch both Sam and the audience completely off guard. This approach was meant to create a more emotionally grounded dynamic between Sam and Michaela. Rather than just playing Alice for shock value, the writers hoped to frame her as a more authentic threat to their relationship, one rooted in charm and relatability rather than seduction alone. But ultimately, those scenes were never finished. And according to the writers, even if they had been, it's likely they would have been cut for pacing reasons. They admitted that with everything already packed into the movie, something would have to give, and chances were it would have been Alice's slower buildup. So instead, the final film introduces her as an overly sultry presence right out the gate. Still, despite the shift in tone, Isabel Lucas managed to convey everything the role needed in a single moment. As the writers put it, even without the build-up, that look, the one she gives Sam the first time he sees her, told the audience everything that they needed to know. But it wasn't just subtle glances that defined her performance. For the scene where Alice lashes out and attacks Sam, Lucas had to clamp down on a long, snake-like prop tongue with her teeth. It extended from her mouth and physically wrapped around Shia LaBeouf's neck. It's another example of the strange but memorable work that went into bringing Alice to life. And in a handful of shots in the movie, especially the close-ups on LaBeouf, you can actually see the prop tongue briefly before it's replaced with a CGI version. But this wasn't the only practical effect used for Alice. In addition to the tongue gag, a full rod puppet of Alice's Decepticon form was built for the scene where Sam, Michaela, and Leo steal a car to flee from Alice. The puppet was created by the talented team at KMB EFX Group, and was designed to capture the terrifying transformation of Alice without relying entirely on CGI. Comprised of just the chest and head, it was supported by an internal steel armature and a set of rods that allowed the shoulders and head to move in limited puppet-like motions. Its design pushed the monstrous qualities of the character, featuring sculpted resin pieces painted in metallic gray, and a head framed by a wild nest of hair that had braided wires wrapped in gray plastic, some ending in sharp arrowhead-like points. Interestingly enough, the puppet's eyes were tinted pink, which is a detail that stands out since they were tinted blue in the concept art and in the final film. The puppet itself does make a brief appearance in the final cut. During the scene where Alice jumps onto the car and pierces the windshield with her tongue, you can spot it if you look closely. Since the puppet only consisted of the upper torso and head, her lower body was digitally created in post-production. Additional puppet elements, including practical hands, were also used, and you can clearly see them during the moment when Sam struggles to push Alice off of him. But of course, practical effects could only go so far, and that's where Digital Domain came in. Tasked with handling 130 VFX shots for Revenge of the Fallen, the studio, co-owned by Michael Bay at the time, was responsible for bringing some of the film's most intricate sequences to life. While ILM tackled the heavy hitters like Optimus Prime and Devastator, Digital Domain specialized in the smaller, weirder characters. Robots like Wheelie, the kitchen appliance bots, Reedman, and Soundwave. But perhaps their most challenging assignment was Alice's transformation. It wasn't just about visual spectacle, it had to feel grounded in reality, blending a convincing human performance with a horrifying robotic reveal. And unlike most Transformers, there was no vehicle mode to work from. This transformation had to unfold directly from flesh to machine. To pull it off, Digital Domain began by creating the full body shot of Alice's transformation, an ambitious sequence where thousands of pieces of synthetic skin violently rip away, exposing the spiky Decepticon beneath. The process started at Gentle Giant Studios, where Isabel Lucas was cyberscanned to create a highly detailed 3D model of her head and body. That model was then used by Digital Domain to match her live-action performance frame by frame. In other words, they projected the 2D footage of Lucas onto her 3D double, rotomating the digital geometry so every movement aligned perfectly with her performance. This gave the team a seamless starting point where the CGI and the real actress appeared indistinguishable. Rather than morphing the skin away as a single piece, Bay said that he wanted little tiles, but it was up to the team to figure out the exact look. The transformation had to feel dynamic and mechanically plausible, so they iterated on patterns of tiles sliding and flipping in complex synchronized motions, much like a puzzle coming apart. Digital Domain's FX team designed a complex system that split Alice's digital body into approximately 200,000 small tile-like shards. These tiles were stamped procedurally over her entire CG form, using Houdini's point cloud system, then animated to flip, shatter, or peel away using rule-based control maps. These maps determined when and how each cluster of skin tiles would break away or flip at a given moment. Using Houdini simulation tools, the VFX artist choreographed the tiles to peel back in a controlled manner. On one side of each tile, they kept the projection of human skin, and on the back side, they projected the imagery of the robot interior. This way, as the tile rotated 180 degrees, it would gradually transition from looking like flesh to looking like metallic plating. Some sections were further refined in Maya with hand-keyed animation, giving the impression of organic skin splintering into mechanical bits. However, the transformation wasn't limited to just the surface. The inner robot had to emerge from within. But Alice's true robotic form, with its spiky limbs and triple-jointed arms, wouldn't physically fit inside the volume of the actress's body. To solve this, the CGI model of the Decepticon was animated in a transitional state. As the human shell exploded into tiles, the robot itself was transforming and unfolding to an extent, ensuring that by the end of the sequence, its full form emerges. But having the model match her movements was only half the battle. The real challenge came when those skin tiles started flying off. The footage of Isabel Lucas was shot on set, meaning that the lighting on her body was already baked into the plate. So when pieces of her digital skin rotated or broke away, the undersides and the robot parts beneath had no real lighting to reference. As soon as a tile flipped, it looked wrong. The light didn't change, shadows didn't fall naturally, and the illusion broke. So to fix this, Digital Domain had to recreate the lighting of the actual dorm room from scratch. They took HDR photographs of the set and used them to digitally rebuild the room's lighting environment. That way, each piece of flying skin and every part of the robot form could respond to light and shadow in a physically accurate way. The result was a subtle but crucial improvement. Each tile now darkened, reflected light, or cast shadows as it moved, making the entire transformation feel real. To make that digital lighting behave realistically, Digital Domain relied heavily on ray tracing, a rendering technique that simulates how light interacts with surfaces. Every single tile flying off Alice had to reflect the dorm room around it, cast shadows on nearby tiles, and respond to the virtual lighting setup with proper highlights and ambient occlusion. That's what made the difference between a flat artificial look and one that felt grounded in the live-action scene. Ray tracing is incredibly demanding on computers because it calculates light paths for every pixel. Some of the renders in this sequence were described as very expensive but necessary, not in terms of money, but processing time. But the payoff was worth it. The robot beneath Alice's skin did not just appear metallic, it behaved like it, reflecting the room's lighting, environment, and even the motion blur from the camera. It's one of the reasons why the transformation, though brief, holds up so well almost 2 decades later. Once everything was rendered, the final stage was compositing, where all the pieces were layered and blended into the live-action plate. Digital Domain used Nuke as their compositing software, and this part of the process was just as complex as the animation and rendering. Each skin tile wasn't just a single render. Artists had to generate dozens of passes for every element. Diffuse for base color, spectral for highlights, reflection, ambient occlusion, depth of field, motion blur, and more. As one compositor joked, they eventually lost count, but there were around 50 different passes feeding into the final comp. These allowed the artist to dial in exactly how each of the tiles should look as it moved, adjusting for brightness, blur, or color on a per-tile basis if needed. In total, Digital Domain spent over 6 months developing the full-body transformation. Work on Alice began in November 2008, and the team was still iterating and finalizing the shot by May 2009, just before the film's release. The sequence required extensive back-and-forth revisions to get the animation, lighting, tile behavior, and robot emergence to feel cohesive and believable. It wasn't just a technical exercise, it was a creative puzzle, where every choice influenced everything else. As CG supervisor Paul George Palla put it, everything would affect everything. We had to go back and forth. It took us months and months and months to find a combination we were happy with. Now, one of the most impactful last-minute changes came during these final months. Throughout the sequence, Alice had long dreadlock-like hair, and in the original version of the shot, it hung straight down. But Michael Bay noticed something. The silhouette wasn't dramatic enough. "She's like a Medusa," he said. Acting on that note, the team reposed the dreadlocks to flare outward, adding a wild expressive shape that gave Alice's transformation a much more menacing presence. Still, even after months of work on the full-body transformation, Bay felt something was missing. You see, late into production, he requested a brand new shot to punch up the horror, a close-up of Alice's face mid-transformation. It would only last about 40 frames, just under 2 seconds, but it had to be convincing, detailed, and terrifying. Digital Domain now faced a new challenge under a compressed timeline. Unlike the full body shot, which used tens of thousands of procedural tiles and simulated motion, this insert needed extreme control and precision, especially around the eyes and mouth, where audiences naturally focus. But because of budget and manpower constraints, this animation had to be done the old-fashioned way, by hand. It meant that 5 guys would spend the next 3 months of their lives on less than 2 seconds of the final film. Using the high-resolution cyberscan of Isabel Lucas, they mapped the footage onto her digital double just like before, but this time, they hand-animated roughly 50 skin shards, placed around the cheeks, mouth, jawline, and forehead. Each tile was meticulously animated to crack, peel, and rotate away with eerie precision. No physics simulations, no procedural systems, just manual keyframes frame by frame, driven entirely by the instincts for horror and anatomy. To enhance the realism, the edges of each skin piece were given additional texture and displacement mapping, creating jagged, torn surfaces that caught the light in unsettling ways. The animators also tracked every tiny movement of Lucas's head, transferring it to the robotic face underneath to maintain perfect alignment. The result was a seamless transition where skin peeled away, revealing the Decepticon just beneath the surface. They also had to rebuild the background behind Alice. Once her head and shoulders were replaced with CGI, the clean background plate behind her was no longer usable. Artists had to patch in the missing pieces of the dorm room by using clean plates, paintouts, and projection techniques. In some areas, they even enhanced Alice's silhouette, just to improve the clarity of her shape during transformation. Once all the pieces were in place, the shot entered the compositing stage. Artists layered the final rendering, lighting passes, and facial elements into the original plate using Nuke. They even used the morphing tricks to help transition between the actress's face and the robot beneath, working backwards from the final robot reveal frame to make sure every piece landed where it needed to. Despite the close-up lasting less than 2 seconds on screen, the effort behind it was monumental. 5 guys spent 3 months of their lives on 40 frames of film, but the payoff was undeniable. The shot delivered a gruesome, unforgettable moment that elevated the entire transformation sequence, and proved just how far the team at Digital Domain was willing to go to make the impossible feel real. It was one of the most complex VFX challenges in Revenge of the Fallen, and arguably one of the most memorable. It's easy to overlook a moment like this. Blink and you might miss it. But for the team that created it, those approximately 143 frames of horror were anything but forgettable. And today, Alice's transformation stands out not just as a shocking plot twist, but as a testament to what's possible when practical effects, digital craftsmanship, and a bold creative vision collide.